Every numismatist knows the poetry of coins. Those little lumps of metal capture and convey beauty. They express complex ideas and emotions in just a few well-chosen words or images. They allow us, as Wordsworth says of poetry, to recollect powerful feelings in tranquility. What better way to describe the passionate collector musing quietly over the money of a boisterous and bygone age? No wonder some poets become collectors too. Let's meet one of them, a seafaring veteran of the American Civil War who composed what we might now call the rhymes of an aged mariner. His name was Thomas Stevens Collier. When he was just 14 years old, he went to sea and stayed there most of his life. He joined the U.S. Navy during the Civil War and endured serious battle injuries. In his diary, he chronicled his travels worldwide and scribbled poetry about love, war, nature, and death. Not much escaped his busy pen, from verses on Cleopatra dying to an ode to cockroaches. Collier published many of his poems in the literary magazines of his day, and a collection titled Song Spray appeared in 1889. This poetic sailor had another passion as well. He loved to collect things, books, stamps, bric-a-brac, and especially coins. Sometimes his passions overlapped and produced poems about coins. Let's sample a few of them today. If you wanted to write a poem about one of these ancient coins, which one would you choose as your subject? Most of us might naturally pick out the most impressive coin, right? A thing of beauty worthy of poetry. But Thomas Collier did something different in this poem titled simply The Old Coin, published in the American Journal of Numismatics back in 1868. Here he pays tribute to a poorly preserved specimen, the kind nearly every collector accumulates over time but hides away in a junk box never to be shown to visitors. And yet such damaged coins were the most successful of their day, well used, well worn, well traveled, and well spent. It was so widely circulated and worn out that the poet cannot even be certain of the metal, brass or bronze. He does not know which Roman emperor minted it, Nero or Vespasian's son. Nor can he read all the lettering stamped upon it, just parts of a name and date. Yet, says Collier, people once fought and died for coins like this, and rulers relied upon such monetary memorials to keep their fame alive. Even though the author could never be certain, his lines hint that the coin is a heavily worn sestertius of the Roman Emperor Nero. Collier mentions a golden palace that must be the famous Domus Aurea, the Golden House, constructed by Nero in Rome. The barely preserved coin portrait is not a flattering one, described here as having a cruel mouth, a swinish chin, and wolfish eye. By the pseudo-scientific conventions of phrenology popular in Collier's day, these features correspond closely to Nero's reputation for gluttony and greed. Of Vespasian's two sons, Domitian was similarly reviled, and this may account for the poet wondering whether he might be the one on the coin and not Nero. On balance, however, the verdict tends toward the last of the Julio-Claudians, although this attribution is not essential to the poem, whose theme is that the wide circulation of the coin satisfied the needs of its users so well that it erased the details its maker hoped would secure his fame beyond the grave. That is simple but poetic and powerful. Collier published other poems about Nero, such as this one in 1881, and it too takes a dim view of that emperor's character and his crimes. Collier's poem titled On an Early Coin of Egypt, also published in 1881, tells the story of a coin honoring some great conqueror who would be forgotten today, his palaces crumbled to dust, if not for the salvation of a single coin. It reads, "The palaces are crumbled to the dust, the mighty men of war are long forgot, and even the king would be unknown to fame, had not you held his deeds in sacred trust, and brought to us unstained by cruel blot the resonance and glory of his name." Collier's personal collection of coins included hundreds of Roman imperial specimens, fulfilling his grand ambition to own a portrait coin of every Roman emperor, along with images of their wives and children. His coins from the Roman Republic were also quite numerous, and he owned many ancient Greek coins, plus another 1,000 medieval and modern specimens as well, some of great value. It is a hopeless challenge to identify the particular coin in his collection that inspired any given poem, even when he names the type in the title. For example, in 1880 and again in 1884, Thomas Collier published this poem on a dram of Corinth that tells its story in the first person, or is that first coin? Anyway, I've long struggled to make sense of this piece. The coin begins by chronicling the extraction of its ore from a Celtiberian mine in Spain. This was shipped to Carthage and thence to Tyre, doubling back on the momentous trail of Phoenician expansion across the length of the Mediterranean Sea. The crafty Tyrians purified the silver and traded it for some Samian coins, and from there the bullion reached across the Aegean Sea to Corinth, where it was finally minted as a dram bearing a portrait of Aphrodite, called Venus by the Romans. It would look something like this, a coin datable to the 4th century BC, showing the winged horse Pegasus on one side and mighty Aphrodite on the other. None of the coins in the auction catalogs of Collier's collection matches this particular type. The closest is a Corinthian hemidram, number 17. In the poem's final lines, the coin makes a monumental mistake. It recalls old Homer, sitting with it by the sea, a chronological impossibility since coinage was invented centuries after Homer's time. Maybe Collier identified with a fellow poet, sitting by the sea and fondling a coin, even if this fantasy made him a better poet than a numismatist. Collier may have seen himself in another of his poems, titled On an Ancient Roman Coin, published in his 1889 book Song Spray. In roles the poet had played himself, he imagined a soldier or a sailor leaving the coin behind to cheer a loved one or to safeguard a home. I close with a curious 1881 sonnet that pays homage to the nemesis of nearly every coin collector, the crafty counterfeiter. Thomas Collier expresses in this poem a grudging admiration for the skills of a famous German forger named Karl Wilhelm Becker. The poet calls Becker cunning and a wizard, and indeed he was. In the early 19th century, Becker mastered the art of making stunning copies of ancient coins. He struck them from his own hand-carved dies, like this one, using the ancient metal from less collectible types. He aged his creations by tumbling them in a metal container attached to the axle of his horse-drawn carriage, and by sometimes storing them in old manure. Where did Collier see Becker's handiwork? The sonnet appears in a periodical published by the coin dealer Edouard Frossard, another Civil War veteran. In March 1881, Frossard sold some of Becker's Roman imitations and wrote several articles about the genius who had made them. This no doubt afforded Collier the opportunity to examine a few of the forgeries firsthand. So there you have it, a few of the rhymes of an aged mariner named Thomas Stevens Collier. He died suddenly on September the 21st, 1893, silencing a busy pen that had for years recounted his fascination with coins. His collection was auctioned away by his family, as if, to quote him again, the coins were left to guard some lonely home from fierce attack of hunger, want, and care by a tanned sailor bound across the main. Like the coins he loved, we can be grateful that his poetry endures, the words perhaps dated and worn, meant for use in another age, but a welcome memorial nonetheless of an extraordinary man. An aged numismatist, but no mariner myself, I'm Dr. Frank L. Holt, thanking you for spending some time in my ancient and modern worlds. Please pause just a moment to like, subscribe, and share this video with others, and to comment as well. Tell me about numismatic poems and poets that you admire, and I'll see you here next time.